What up, Perps? Kid Copious back in effect. Purple State Party. You know what we're doing here. Repping America, the center, and good old-fashioned common sense. We need a lot more of that. If we just did things with common sense, we would have a much better world, a much better state, a much better country. It'd all be good. Let's get it rolling. All right, we'll start with some somewhat breaking news here. Marjorie Taylor Greene out of Georgia is retiring. You know, when she first came on the scene, I kind of liked her. She seemed serious. She posted a lot of workout videos, things like that. Kind of drew me in. But over time, she started talking about space lasers, and she just became a clickbait meme and kind of a crackpot. And I don't really think that's a real good representation. I mean, that's not somebody who I would want leading. So had to rethink that. It has nothing to do with her fighting with Trump. I'm not one of those Trump sycophants. You know, you could argue with Trump and I'm still going to like you. I'm still going to love you. Even if you disagree, even if you vote against him. Members of my own family did not vote for Trump, and I don't hold that against them. I hold that who they voted for against them a little bit. I never thought Kamala Harris was worth a damn. I didn't think Joe Biden was worth a damn. And I didn't think Hillary Clinton was right for America. So the choice you made is what I graded you on. But speaking of rethinking things, you know, Republicans, you know, conservatives, you know, they brand themselves towards the religious, to the conservative-minded people. You know, they're not without their faults. You know, they're hypocrites. They preach family values and then sleep with the nanny. But their main platform is not hypocritical. Whereas the Democrats are just straight up playing people. They straight up lie about who they are. They straight up lie about who they represent. They always say, oh, we're here for the minorities and the downtrodden. But then they pass rules and regulations and taxes that really affect the bottom rungs of the ladder more than the top rungs of the ladder. And, you know, it's that kind of hypocrisy that drives me up the wall. You know, one of the biggest left-wing hypocrisies is Antifa. Anti-fascist. Where are these fascists that you're fighting against? Are they real fascists, or are they just people that you don't like, so you label them fascists? I mean, they're like a UFO fighter group or a Bigfoot hunter. They're out there pretending to be against something that doesn't even exist. And meanwhile, the party that they do support is out there talking about taxing the rich when they're being led by the rich. I mean, how can you support these kind of people? These people are the epitome of the wealthy white privilege that they say they're against. People running around, oh, white privilege this and white privilege that. Oh, who's the bigger white privilege? Gavin Newsom? Yeah, he certainly is. These people who run the Democrats are the capitalist swine pigs that you claim to hate. Agree or disagree, at least the conservatives aren't this giant contradiction. You know? The Republicans are for America first. They don't really necessarily advocate towards any one group. You know, they don't necessarily, I don't think personally that the Republicans lie about who they are to get people into their camp. But with the duplicitous Democrats, you get capitalists masquerading around as socialists. You don't see that with the Republicans. The Republicans don't really give a lot of party preference to minority groups or groups at all. They don't say, oh, we're here for the women, we're here for this, we're here for that, and then act unaccordingly. Look at the Democrats. A great example of the Democrats. Oh, we're here for a woman's right to choose. Okay, cool. I'm all for that. But at the same time, they're also the people who are allowing the random drug addicts and crazy people on the streets. They're the people who contextualize crime. They're the people who, like here in California, lower sexual assault to a misdemeanor. I mean, how is that really helping women? But remember, when we talk about socialism, socialism's okay if you're already rich, because many doors are going to be slammed shut. It's us. I'm talking about me and all my fellow grinders out there who lose jobs and lose insurance and lose housing not the rich leaders. I'll wager that if socialism was enacted in the United States, it would just make us all equally poor, while the rich leaders live the decadent life that they get you to rail against. See, that's the difference. The Democrats get you to rail against something that they themselves are participating in. What do the Republicans do? I don't see that. I don't see an example where the Republicans get us fired up about something, but then do exactly the opposite. I just don't. They say, hey, we want to get the illegal aliens out. They go and get the illegal aliens. They don't say we're against illegal aliens and open the borders. I don't know. One time I did an article about, I read an article on my show about the difference between left-wing people on the East Coast and West Coast, and how on the East Coast they seem to pull back on some of their wilder ideas to keep the ship afloat. For example, a good example is California is very lowly ranked in education, but Massachusetts is very highly ranked, and they're both very blue. And it's that kind of mentality that purple state strives to bring. You can be as liberal as you want, but at the end of the day, you need to do the things to keep the doors open. The reason I bring that up is Oakland School District is broke. California just released them from receivership and gave the power to control the schools back to Oakland School District. And they're already $4 million in the hole per month, $48 million for a year. But near me, schools have closed. The population has shifted around me. A lot of the people here have grown kids or they're young people with overpaying jobs. Pure and simple. But in Oakland, the school board is too afraid of the teachers union and keeps caving on cutbacks, expecting Gavin to bail them out. Here near me, they closed schools to save money. Instead of operating schools that were only at half capacity, they closed them. They stood up to the teachers union. And that's what we've lost here in California, and we're losing in a lot of these blue-controlled areas where they want to be all this progressive stuff. They want to give in to the teachers union. They're afraid of not getting reelected. So if the teachers union says no, they just go along with it. They can't stand up to them. And keep that in mind because, right now, both sides are trying to gerrymander. Okay? We know this is going on. But there's a big difference. All right? There is a big difference. They are not perpetuating big lies in some of these other states, like Texas. Texas was ordered to redraw them. They're going to redraw them. They're going to gerrymander them further. So Gavin Newsom stands up and says, no, we need to fight back. And he puts something on the ballot. Texas was, okay, let's go back. Let's start at the start here. Do you know that piece of shit Gavin removed the language from Prop 50 that said that if Texas backs down or if Texas is stopped from redistricting, California will drop their redistricting? They removed that from the ballot. So, Texas was stopped. The Supreme Court has stepped in and paused that order, but California is going to gerrymander either way. Keep that in mind. This is just like the Road Safety Act we had a few years ago, where the Democrats here in California framed it as road safety, highway safety, blah, 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 blah. But it was a tax hike with no guarantees where the money was going to be spent. So Prop 50 comes along, Gavin lies and justifies. They get Obama on board to lie and justify. But at the end of the day, California is going to redistrict, regardless of what happens in Texas. That was the lie they sold you. You realize that? California is going to redistrict no matter what Texas does. Oh, I can hear people out there because they always say this when you badmouth California. California is the fourth largest economy in the world. Okay, and I got a few questions for you. If California is the fourth largest economy in the world, then why do we have the eighth highest crime rate? Why do we have the second highest electrical rates? We are second only to Hawaii, which at least is justified in having high electrical rates. They don't have the resources or even the land that California does. California sits on a whole bunch of oil reserves. We pay the highest gas prices. We're first in the nation in chronic homelessness. which means crazy drug addicts living on the streets. Only 29% of our fourth graders are proficient in reading. Huh. Of course, you know what they blame that on, right? Yeah, immigration. Yeah, right. Because we incentivize illegal immigration here. We're number one in poverty, addiction, gas taxes, income taxes. We are anti-business, pro-illegal immigrant. We're running huge budget deficits. We're running a high debt. We owe all kinds of money to the federal government. We survive on that very government and the aerospace contracts that we get. We survive on big tech, who eventually, believe it or not, California will figure out a way to clean out the Silicon Valley. Look, we've talked about it on this show before. Rich people can move easily. Rich people could set up in other states and then rent a house in Beverly Hills, and their kids could go to California schools. I don't know why you'd want to, but they've got great private schools and great colleges here. But they can leave. They can take their taxes elsewhere and come back and still live here and still come out ahead because of how much we tax businesses and individuals who earn money. Meanwhile, all of the politicians are earning bank too. They just make sure that their rules don't apply to them. It's really easy. If you have to pay a 5% tax on a $5 million mansion, just figure out how to get your mansion to come in at $4,099,000, whatever, right? Just keep it south of $5 million. They know the loopholes because they wrote the loopholes. California is turning into a big, giant fucking lie under Gavin Newsom. And he wants to run for president. The best reason for living in California is the things we can spend our money on. So capitalism. But yet we're home to all these socialists. The weather? Believe me, if Gavin and the Democrats could tax us for sunshine usage, they would. They need cash to buy votes and stave off competition. Pure and simple. Their shit is broken and they're running scared. Because if Republicans ever drop their stance on abortion, it's all over for the Democrats. That's really about all they have left to get, women on board. 51% of the population is women. So as long as you can appeal to women, you're fine, I guess. Yeah. I rail a lot about California because I love it here. I rail against the Democrats because I just call it as I see it. On Purple State Party, I really think that we need a viable third party to take on Republicans and Democrats. But right now, the people that are really dragging us down are the Democrats. Republicans are not perfect. They have a lot of ideals that I disagree with. But I live in a blue state, and I see what these blue state policies lead to. And it's not good, and it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. That's just the bottom line. If right now 51% of 10 units or less in California have been sold to big developers who tear them down and put up big giant towers, thus reducing the mom and pop landlords, in 10 years, what's that 51%? Is it still going to be 51%? No, it's going to keep growing and growing and growing until nobody can afford to live in California. Because remember, California, the Democrats here in California, they want California to be a playground for the rich. And the only people they want are the poor people who are going to clean their toilets. And at this point, I think what they really want to do is move all the poor people to Nevada and make them commute 3 hours to jobs. They don't care. They want California. They want the West Coast for their own exclusive playground. Middle-class people tend to get in the way because we could sort of afford some of the stuff that the rich people like to do. That's what it is. That's why I fight against it. All right, we'll move on now. The Mehpstein files. Bunch of blah, blah, blah in there. I already told you. I've said it many times. If there was anything in there that could sink Trump, the Democrats would have already brought it forward. They had the files under Biden. But what's odd is so far the only 3 people that have been really damaged by the Epstein files are Democrats. And before I talk about these individual articles, what's going on with the Epstein files right now is very distasteful to me. All right, I understand that we need to know And if there are criminal charges to be brought, those criminal charges should be brought and those people should be exposed. But what's really happening right now is, let's just say that you had a cousin who was running drugs. So the FBI, ATF, DEA, they tap your phone. Okay, they want to hear if maybe your cousin will tell you something. But along the way, they capture audio of your wife talking about having an affair. The investigation wraps up and they say, hey, you know what? We talked to such and such. We talked to, we were investigating Kid Copious, but, he was clean. Nothing was revealed during his phone conversations, except that his wife's having an affair. Now, my life has been destroyed, right? But I wasn't convicted of anything. I didn't do anything. I think that the three Democrats that we're about to talk about here are sort of in the same boat. It's distasteful. All three of them are distasteful, but none of them are criminal. So do we really need to know this? I don't know. I don't really know. I don't know what we're supposed to make of the fact that people had communications with a scumbag pedophile who's now dead. I mean, if he was still alive and operating and these people were talking with him, it would be a different story. I want to preface that. But, this is probably why under Joe Biden, they kept the file silent. But then they needed clickbait and they needed something to rile up the Democrat base against Trump. So they said, oh, Trump's hiding the Epstein files. Well, okay, so let's look at this. Larry Summers, he's a Harvard professor. He was Clinton's chief of treasury or treasury chief. And he's one of the ones who's now having to sort of retire from public life. Of course, he's extremely rich. But he had an ongoing investigation. An ongoing relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. They actually gave each other romantic advice. Oh, that's amazing. But, he was just a friend of the guy. Okay, creepy, whatever, cool. But does he need to have his life destroyed? I don't think so. But it is. Because that's what happens when you release all of this information without any context. Another one that's in trouble is a congresswoman, another Democrat congresswoman, Stacey Plaskett, who was texting during an oversight committee hearing with Jeffrey Epstein while trying to conspire with him to hurt or embarrass Donald Trump. But according to Democrat spokespeople, she was only talking with Mr. Epstein because he was a constituent. Really, that's how you're going to frame it? You're going to say, oh, he lives there and she represents him? Mm-hmm. But what's odd about that is she was conspiring to take down Trump with Epstein. So how connected to Epstein was Trump? Well, they terminated their friendship. That's the truth of the matter. He didn't talk to him after things came out and after Trump realized that Epstein was creeping on some of the employees. And, of course, the minority speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, who, of course, lied and said, my campaign had nothing to do with Epstein. So they brought it right up, right there in the committee. Brought up his emails where Hakeem Jeffries' campaign reached directly to Jeffrey Epstein, soliciting campaign dollars for, quote, Brooklyn's Barack. To Jeffrey Epstein, dear Jeffrey, we are thrilled that we are working with Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, one of the rising stars of the New York delegation, sometimes referred to as Brooklyn's Barack. Hakeem is committed to electing a Democrat majority in 2014 and is encouraging his friends to participate in a DCCC fundraising dinner with President Obama and Hakeem Jeffries. It ends with a number for Jeffrey Epstein to call to go to the dinner and get an opportunity to know Jeffries better. And this was already after people knew what kind of a creep Epstein was, but they didn't really care at the time. And to some degree, that's still true. What Epstein did was gross, but it's not the worst possible person to be connected with. It's not like he was conspiring with our enemies to shut down nuclear reactors or sink aircraft carriers. I'm not condoning what he did one bit. But what I'm saying is they have blown his importance out of the water to keep the clicks a-coming. It reminds me of the movie They Live, starring the legendary R.I.P. Rowdy Piper. They Live was basically about how the aliens had invaded. They had taken human form. The media was constantly feeding them the little dopamine drips to get them to spend their money on things, much like we see now with social media and influencers, keeping us all just calm and complacent and not looking for answers. We don't want to look behind the curtain and see what's actually going on. So they gave us Epstein to keep us distracted right now from all the crap that's happening in the country. And I got to tell you, the crap that's happening in the country, for the most part, is blue. We'll get to some of that. Tensions boil over as Broadview mayor declares civil emergency over threats, holds board meetings remotely. So this is right outside Chicago, where the death threats and the bomb threats coming from conservatives, Republicans? Nah. It was coming from people who were upset about ISIS going into Chicago, Operation Midway Blitz. And so people were threatening the mayor, threatening the town, threatening to disrupt village government, even bomb threats. Why? Because federal agents are looking to round up illegal immigrants? So the people who generally vote left will turn on the people who are left if they don't toe the exact party line. You see how that works? And meanwhile, their little group Antifa is out there saying that they're anti-fascist. This is fascist. Just because a town doesn't try to bar ICE from operating, okay, which they can't do anyhow, you will burn them down. See, that's the difference that I really see between Democrats and Republicans, okay? You cannot disagree with anybody in the Democrat Party or you will be ostracized. They are a cult, much like Scientology. I have known conservative people all my life, okay? I know how they feel about me. I know how they felt about me. It was said publicly sometimes about how wonderful I was at this or that or the other thing. But they disagreed with me. And I'm talking about when I was a member of a church. I held my beliefs, okay? I have my own beliefs on Jesus and God, all right? I don't discriminate against minorities of any sort. Okay? I will defend them publicly and in people's faces. And people, the conservative people that I knew, respected me for those opinions. They thought maybe I was wrong, but they respected me for the strength and conviction that I had. Democrats will burn you at the fucking stake. That's my problem with them. That's why my focus is often on them. Because we need to have discussion. R.I.P. Charlie Kirk. That's all Charlie Kirk wanted to do, was have discussions. Open people's minds to alternate ways of thinking. It is fine. It is fine to have progressive ideas and ideals and to want to live up to those ideals. But when you sink the ship doing it, what's the frickin' point? One of the things that drives me up the wall is in California, you have the right to choose, but they want to take away your gun rights. We are very, very LGBT friendly here in this state, and I'm proud of that. But does that mean our streets need to be overrun with chronically homeless people? In other words, people who aren't ever going to try to keep a home. If you gave a lot of the people that I see on the streets in LA, if you gave them an apartment, they would immediately gut it and probably burn it to the ground. Because they're drug addicts, because they're crazy, because they cannot take care of themselves. And that's where the progressives just keep on going with it. Instead of, they say it's compassionate to let these people die on the streets. They say it's compassion that has bums sitting in front of businesses until the businesses go out of business. And then the bums ransack the building, steal all the copper, destroy windows, break doors, and possibly even burn the place down. It has to end. We need these people off the streets. If we want to do it compassionately, great. But you're only going to save 30%. The rest of them, the state is going to need to have to look after them. And stop telling us that it's compassionate to allow an 18-year-old to waste away on the streets, spend night after night just like a 2x4 because they're all high on fucking fentanyl. We can help these people. And not just for 6 months. We can help these people until they're able to stand on their own feet again. Or prove that they don't want to. And at that time, they go to jail. We can't solve problems through mass incarceration. I agree with that statement coming from the left. But if we can't solve it, then the only answer is mass incarceration. We have to look at it that way. We have to see that. Look, overall, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't even matter Green Party, Red Party, Blue Party, Purple Party. The biggest problem we have, I believe, starts with corruption, okay? Because when you're corrupt, you often, like, for example, going back to Oakland, okay, the Oakland School District, they need the votes and the contributions from the teachers' union. So they're willing to bend over for the teachers' union. They put themselves, the school districts, in debt, $4 million a month. They're not going to change anything because the teachers' union benefits them personally. Maybe not professionally, but personally. And that's what we need to stamp out. And one of the ways that we stamp it out is we start electing officials who have good qualifications. I mean, one of the craziest people in government right now, AOC, she started out as a bartender. I would actually say that's a great place to start. I think that makes a lot of sense. But she didn't really have the full experience. It'd be better if they ran a bar, for example. A lot of times people who come from my class, you know, the working class, the grinders, right? We abhor corruption. We can shun fancy things. I often say, I wish I had the money to buy a Lamborghini. I wouldn't buy a Lamborghini, but I wish I had the money, right? Not necessarily drawn in by the fancy things in life. I want what I need to make myself comfortable. But down in Miami, there's a congresswoman, Democrat congresswoman, Sheila McCormick. Her and her family had a family health care company, and they accidentally received an overpayment of $5 million in FEMA funds during the COVID crisis. Her and her family conspired to steal that $5 million, rerouting it, using straw donors to make it look like it was donations to her political campaign. They then took it a step further and in 2021 filed a false tax return. They were literally told by the government, hey, we overpaid you, we need the money back. And they literally said no. And just thought they would get away with it. What was her statement about it? Oh, they're doing it because they hate the black and the brown. She pulled the race card. Not the fact that she stole $5 million that wasn't hers. If the bank accidentally put $5 million in your bank account, do you think you're entitled to it? If you spent that money and the bank came after you and the police came after you, would you then say, oh, this is based on racism? No. Like Pam Bondi says, using disaster relief funds for self-enrichment is a particularly selfish, cynical crime. No one is above the law, least of all powerful people who rob taxpayers for personal gain. We will follow the facts in this case and deliver justice. And I hope they do, because McCormick is facing up to 53 years in prison. These are the kinds of politicians that we need to stop electing. People who are just, they don't belong there. Across the board, we see this. We're seeing in California with Rob Bonta, where Rob Bonta is now claiming that he had to spend $500,000 on legal services when he had to give a deposition in a case against a wealthy donor of his. So he needed $500,000 so he could have lawyers sit next to him while he answered questions in a case where he was not on trial. He was not under investigation. He was not the subject of this. But no, $500,000 to lawyers. And I wonder how many were connected friends. Right now, how fucking crazy this world is? How crazy America's gotten? You know who in politics I trust the most? A lot of people out there listening to me would probably say like Donald Trump. Nah, it's not Donald Trump. You know who I trust? I trust John Fetterman. Because even though John Fetterman is a Democrat, he changes sides depending on what the situation is. Like he said, like he was all against the shutdown because the Democrats were trying to blackmail, extort illegal immigration healthcare funds and holding Americans hostage. And he said that's ridiculous. He'll change when he needs to change. I had a lot of hope for Donald Trump. I still have hope for Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump could pull the Republicans to the center if he has the guts, legalizing marijuana, kind of reducing the pressure on anti-abortion, kind of dropping that by the roadside. Just like, let's just go back to the Roe versus Wade days. I think he can do it. But right now, the one I trust is Fetterman. And at the end of his term, he'll probably be gone. Because the Democrats turn on you. Like I said, they are a cult. And when you leave, they don't want to have anything to do with you. I want to have things to do with you. I want you to be part of this movement. I want you to bring some of your progressive ideals over to the center. And I want to roll forward with them. But I want to use common sense. I don't want to take money from unions. I don't want to make decisions based on a party platform. I want to make decisions based on common sense. What is going to help the most people? And thank you for listening. My numbers go up and down. I appreciate every one of you who tunes in. I appreciate people who leave comments, good or bad. I'm just trying to get conversation started. I'm just trying to wake America up that the two-party system is failing us. My name's Kid Copious, Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another, keep on grinding, and when the world gets too heavy, shake it off and dance it out. Hit it, Steve.